Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and I thought today I'd do something a little bit different for a league and a video, and that's have a bit of fun rating my builds, because typically it's something I've wanted to do at the end of a league, usually run out of time. Currently think I've got a bit of time instead of making a different build video to just instead have a look through a bunch of my videos and click on each one individually, rate it in a system I've just randomly just now currently devised of effectiveness, enjoyment, budget, as in how cheap it is, and give it a good rating out of that, and then give it a total, and then probably at the end just give a personal sort of like regardless of ratings, fun or just like favorite factor for the league as well. So we'll go over each little build, each little video just real quick, summarize the build, and then what it does for how much I enjoyed it, how fun it was, whether or not you should do it as a starter if nothing else changes, or if it's got a decent enough budget, and then like add up its total or some shit and give it a ranking, maybe. I don't know. We'll see how we go. We'll start off with my actual starter, and that was the Explosive Arrow Deadeye, which focused on just the front-loaded damage of Explosive Arrow. It was at the time bugged for like Ignite and bugged for, I don't know, there was a lot of bugs going around, but it wasn't too impactful to my build, I don't think. The idea was Explosive Arrow had a lot of flat fire damage to go with it. You fire off a few arrows, they explode in a second, and they do a certain amount of just damage because we're scaling with pure fire, no real ignite. And it didn't work too bad in the end. It certainly wasn't very good for endgame, and was pretty lackluster for single target damage. But I think that largely was because of the way I tried to build it, and it's going to need more of a budget to really scale it into the infinite. And these days it's been quite proven that Ignite is probably the way to go for the explosive arrows. They can do millions of Ignite DPS if you build them correctly, and they can probably be decent enough starters. This is still quite a lot of fun to do, but it was a bit frustrating in the end to have it fizzle out for endgame, and it wasn't in the end the greatest choice of a starter or something I could have really recommended to other people. So to then have a look at the gear was pretty simple. It was my first character. It was very sort of starter friendly gear, but I'd say for it to get much better, you probably needed to invest a lot more, and there wasn't really much more we could do anyway to make it much better. So if we bust out our rating system, I'd say in effectiveness, it would have been like, it could clear things pretty well. It was fun to clear with, but single target was fairly crap. We'll give it a solid 5. And enjoyment, I'd say I played it for damn near a week or so and put a lot of hours into it to try and make it good. And it was fairly fun. And then by the end, it was just crap for single target, and that wasn't fun. So I'd give that a 6. And can it be a starter? Once again, it was pretty cheap, but ultimately it probably needed more gear to be really good. So I'd still say it was kind of a good starter for gear-wise, but it fizzled out a bit. Let's give it a 7. That brings us to a total of 18, I believe. Next was the build I've basically been telling everyone was my favorite for the league, because people always ask if I've got a favorite build of the league, because they typically just want to know what's the best build you've played and then try that out if they don't want to do too many of my shit. And it was Gladiator Puncture Bow is what I'm saying is the favorite, simply because if we are going to rate it on everything I just then gave you as a rating system, it's probably going to just about top it out. It was very fun to play, it was very effective in the end game and for map clear, and it was pretty damn cheap to get going too. The Gladiator Bleed explosions, if you've never played around with them, are definitely something to look into at least once in your life, and with a ranged delivery system as opposed to a melee one like I've done in the past, double strike, lacerate, that sort of thing. With a range delivery system of split arrow and puncture, it becomes a pretty damn nice playstyle. You can build it fairly tankily, you can do it off of very little currency and gear, and ultimately it should take you all the way through the end game and just be an insanely nice starter, because it's definitely something you can do right from the very early game, and if nothing else changes for the patch notes and all that, it's probably going to be one of the best starters I could still recommend if you're looking for something a little different and not just the flavor of the month cookie cutter builds. So if we have a look at our character's gear, it was just all rares with pretty humble things. You can min-max for physical damage over time modifiers through like elder crafting, hunter crafting, and the bow needed, well, didn't need, but it really did benefit from a corroded fossil craft, and just about any bow would do for that, but you can get slightly better and all that. I've seen examples of bows just about twice as good as mine since I've played the character, and all of this gear should be pretty attainable within a decent amount of playtime. And I did take this character to 94 or maybe even 95, so he put a lot of playtime because I was just enjoying the clear and the gladiator explosions so damn much. So if we then whip open our rating system, we've got effectiveness. I'm gonna hit him with a 9 because it's not the biggest single target in the game. It does take a little while to kill some bosses, but overall it was still very strong, and effectiveness was extremely high for map clearing. Enjoyment, I'm gonna give that just about a 10. I think it was very enjoyable all the way through. And then a budget. Can it be a starter? It sure can, but I'd say you need a few key items like your corroded fossil bow and maybe the Rislatha's belt. Just a few nice items as well. Give that a 9 as well, bringing us to a solid total of 28. We then have my first wonder of the league, and in a little while I think, and that was an Inquisitor Power Siphon CI-based wonder. So it was using the new Barrage support gem, and since Power Siphon has a lot of extra projectiles, you could turn your Power Siphon into a good single target while still maintaining a really good clear from the just GMP aspect of it, but as well as that, the Vile Power Siphon, which could just clear screens quite comfortably throughout all map clearing. And it was very fast, it was very strong overall defensive wise, and then single target was pretty respectable too. If we go ahead and check out just a few of our Metamorph kills and stuff. And overall it was just a very enjoyable character, I think. And Inquisitors are, I don't know, like 0% of the player base. I think they're a very underrated ascendancy overall still somehow, and they do actually deliver quite a lot of potent damage for what you get out of it, based off of the fact that you can ignore all elemental resistances, and that's still extremely potent these days, given that most things have a lot of resists. So it's not the greatest single target in the world, you can see, but for a wonder that wasn't breaking the ceiling on budget, I think it was pretty damn good. And compared to some of the other builds, maybe not as good, but better than most that I played this league, I'd say. And wanding, Power Siphon, very enjoyable indeed. So taking a look at the gear, there wasn't anything outlandishly crazy, just you're trying to get flat damage just about everywhere, and some energy shield as well. You could probably build it more as a life CI, Mind Over Matter Eldritch Battery hybrid, a bit easier, but for the most part the gear was very attainable, and it's going to be, I think, pretty much a 1-for-1 with the new wand skill, Kinetic Blast or some shit, Proj, whatever it's called. It's not Blast. So the new Kinetic Bolt, that's what I think. Yeah, it's going to be pretty much a 1-for-1 for that. So if you want to copy a similar sort of build and try that out, possibly this would be the way forward with that, and maybe go life-based, since that would require less gear. But I think it should be, or could be, built in a very similar fashion. It's going to be up to whether or not that has single target, or you have to use something like Barrage Power Siphon for single target. We're going to say the effectiveness, overall clear was pretty good, and single target not too bad as well, but I don't think it was quite at the same level there, so we'll give it an 8. Enjoyment, also I'd say an 8, and budget, can it be a starter? We'll give that a 7. I don't think it's quite going to be the easiest starter in the world, especially as wanders never are, but now that you got a level 1 wanding skill, maybe it's not too bad. So we got a 16 and a 23. We then have Infernal Below Berserker, which was my attempt at making kind of the squishiest character possible, with a decent amount of damage and just one-shot ability. through Infernal Blow, Face Breakers, so you're only using unarmed, and then you're using an Abyssus, you're a Berserker with increased damage taken, and that actually surprised the shit out of me for how defensive you could make something like this, and it was a pretty good offensive character as well in the end. Wasn't the hugest budget in the world either, you could definitely get away with pretty minimal gear, but it was probably not as much of a starter since you do need some specific items for filling out your resists as well as damage at the same time. So it wasn't quite the easiest starter in the world, but you could probably make it fairly budget as like a non-crit starter perhaps, and in the end it does enough damage to take on the entire game, except the playstyle might be a little clunky for single target at times because you are extraordinarily melee. So we'll go ahead and have a look at the character's gear, and it is mostly just rare crit multi-jewels. You got a couple of unique flasks. A Circle of Guilt goes a long way for just a bit of extra flat fizz. Other than that, you got some specific items like high-level face breakers, Rigwald Curse, a good Abyssus, and then just trying to get life and resists on every other piece of gear. So it wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world to gear at the start, but it's not the most impossible or hardest thing, surprisingly, and you can get like 7,000 life and you don't really feel any damage from physical things coming in too bad, because we are fairly tanky in the end. So for that one, we'd say an effectiveness of probably also about an 8. Single target wasn't the greatest given that you're a melee. Enjoyment, I'd give that one a pretty solid 9. And budget starter, I'm not too sure you'd want to, but I think you definitely could, and would give that maybe a 7. So in total, that one was a nice solid 24. The next character was Doomfletch Prism, and it was a sort of split arrow barrage for single target, and a clear skill of either Ice Shot or Lightning Arrow, or even Split Arrow. All of those could be decent clears, and I played around with all three for quite a while here or there, just to figure out what I wanted, but the idea was a barrage split arrow single target, because it's got a lot of extra projectiles, and with the barrage support you can just make it pretty much stronger than barrage thanks to the flat physical that Doomfletch Prism gets from that. And in the end it was a pretty decent character. I don't think it was the greatest thing in the world. It had really nice clear, but most bow characters probably should, and single target was respectable, but not quite as mind-blowing as I would have liked. And the budget is probably going to be a little hefty for trying to make something like this, as most bow characters typically are, so I'm not sure it'd be the best for a starting character. If we just have a quick look at some of our single target, you can see that it wasn't too bad against Drox. We had some solid damage from time to time, and you can blow up the banners pretty quickly. Being a sort of melee-ish, though, bow character wasn't the most fun thing in the world against a lot of these bosses, so it wasn't quite what you'd expect out of the melee damage like a double strike, and I'd say that's what diminished its sort of enjoyment a bit in the end. So if we have a look at this just Cirrus as well real quick, you can burst through, and being a Pathfinder is so goddamn good just for flask charges at all times. You could basically just mash flasks for every single phase of every single fight without worrying about running out, so it was decent in that respect too. If we have a look at our terrific little rating system, effectiveness, I'd give that a solid 8, I think, overall for everything. Single target, a little bit lackluster. Clear, pretty damn amazing. Enjoyment, it was kind of just another bow build for me, so I'm going to give it roughly a 7, I feel. And then budget, can it be a starter? Not really. I'd probably give that, I mean it can, but it'd take a while to scale into effectiveness. You'd really be min-maxing from like level 92 to 95 if you were kind of starting with a character like this. I'm gonna have to give that a 5, so a 12, and that makes it a 20. Following that up was Cast on Crit Discharge. Now, Discharge is something that was pretty much a relic from the past, because these days you can probably get more effectiveness out of Cast on Critting other things, and it's just too much work for the amount of stuff you get out of it, considering the other stuff you can do too. It is still pretty damn fun just to see this shit, and if you've never done Discharge before, it's a decent example of a build that can get you rolling through Discharge and Cast on Crit, and it was an Elementalist, which is still really decent, but the golems can die to Metamorphs, they can die to some endgame fights like Cirrus, so it might depend on how good the next league mechanic is or golems as to whether or not you want to play something like this, but it was still an overall fairly effective build and did do some decent damage, but it wasn't quite as good as I would have liked. You can get better for cheaper on different gear, I'd say, or on a different character, I mean, and the cast on crit volatile dead or detonate dead character is pretty much the premium as far as I'm concerned for cast on crits, and if you compare it to that, it's definitely a little bit lackluster. But for a novelty of discharge and spectral throw, mashing them together, it's definitely quite a little bit fun in that respect, but it's like my 7th cast on crit discharge or something, so it really has to blow me away to be above and beyond the previous ones. So if we check out the rating here, effectiveness, I'd give it maybe a 7. It was pretty good for clear. Okay for single target, nothing too special, but it did do everything just fine. Enjoyment, once again, I think I'd give that a 7. I had fun, but it's just another cast on crit discharge ultimately for me. Budget, can it be a starter? Not particularly, probably give that a 6 as well. The gear's not insane, but it's going to be a little difficult to actually start with this sort of thing. Give that maybe a total of 20 in the end. You know what? We'll take it down 1 notch. Something has to get a little bit lower for starter stuff. It may as well be this, because it does take some specific gear, and as well as that, it's going to be a bit tough to level if you want to try and branch into a cast on crit and especially discharge. Then I've got to have a look at the Voltaxic Galvanic Arrow and Poison Assassin. God knows what this thing is. It was Lightning Arrow for clear, and then Galvanic Arrow for single target. It was Poison, based off of Volker gloves, and Voltaxic, just to bring in the new Voltaxic. I don't think we made the greatest use of the new Voltaxic for this build, because of the shock effectiveness component wasn't really synergizing there, but it was a fairly fun build to actually put together, and that was most of the fun for me, actually. Putting the character together and the thought process of it, it had pretty good clear. It had somewhat mediocre single target in the end, considering you're an assassin without the greatest defenses, and you're very reliant on your flasks, which might be down during some fights. It was honestly not the greatest character. If you're going to go something like this, you're probably a lot better off for a poison character. Just playing a traditional Pathfinder, Scourge Arrow, be a much stronger character overall. But the novelty of it was definitely there, and it was pretty fun to put together, ultimately a fairly fast character. So got to give a few points for actually being able to clear the game rather fast, but putting the character together might be a little difficult for certain gear choices. So if we have a look at the gear choices, Voltaxic, absolutely easy and crap. You're then going into some heavy chaos damage over time stuff, and impulses might be pretty hard to get early on. Volker's gloves shouldn't be too hard to get, but then you're really min-maxing with LE damage, flat lightning, chaos damage over time, and it becomes a little bit difficult in that regard, but it's not the most expensive. It's just kind of hard to put together early on, I would say. So for effectiveness, it had really good clear. Single target felt kind of mediocre to me because it had a lot of ramp time. Overall, I'd have to give that a 7. Enjoyment for me, once again, that's maybe... It was kind of more novelty of putting it together rather than playing. I'd give that a 6. And budget, can it be a starter? I wouldn't do that. Probably not. Let's give that a solid 5, which is a pretty mediocre rating of 18. Next up is a pretty silly character, which was Divine Eye Occultist that had full cold conversion through the use of Cold Brotherhoods. So he scaled a lot of lightning, then went completely cold, and it's Divine Eye, which is firing a big fucking laser. So it's actually quite a lot of fun. If you've never done a Divine Eye before, definitely something to look into at least once in your life. And it froze everything. Like every one of these Metamorphs, I basically didn't fight. And it was a pretty big novelty for the first time being truly safe against most Metamorph fights because they just didn't fight back. The DPS wasn't the biggest thing in the world, but it was quite good, and it just froze things relentlessly. So the defenses weren't the greatest, but they were respectable enough, especially when factoring in the fact that you basically froze everything always and didn't actually have to fight the enemies. It was not too bad on a budget. You could go, to the ceiling for budget if you wanted, or you could keep it a little bit more realistic. And it'd still perform pretty well. I think it was one of my first Uber Elders for the league, and for a Divine Ire, it wasn't anything truly different for me, so it was a bit less on the enjoyment because of that, since it was just another flat-hitting Divine Ire, but Divine Ire is still a lot of fun because it's just Divine Ire, so it was definitely boosted its rating a bit there as well. And I do like making a cultist because you don't too often get to do that, I feel. It's not always a no-brainer choice for every build. If we then have a look at the gear for this one, we go down here, we click the laser build, and we got ourselves the items. It wasn't anything super crazy, but you can do a lot of min-max. You are life and then mind over matter eldritch battery, so you got to focus on energy shield as well as life at the same time. And the key items here are things like Call of Brotherhoods, Devouring Diadem, Taste of Hate, a Thread of Hope, and Watch as I go a little bit of a way to making the build better, but they're not strictly necessary, and there is a bit of min-max involved in your own crafting. So overall, it's not the most expensive thing to put together, but it's not the easiest thing for a starter, so we'd probably have to take a few points off for that. And start having a look at rating it. So effectiveness-wise, pretty much up there, so I'd have to give it something like a 9 because it could clear really well and it could do bosses really quite well. Enjoyment for me, probably an 8 because it is still Divine Ire, but it's one of the like fifth Divine Ire build or something like that I've done, and second one that just like plain hits things as opposed to doing some other funky interactions. Can it be a starter though? I think it can for the most part, but it does need some pretty solid gear to truly shine in the end game. We'd give it a 6 for that. So in total, that brings it to 23. Not a bad rating, actually. The next character was my first use of the new Explosion mod on chests from the Crusader affix, and as well as that, my first use of Disintegrator, pretty much ever, and it was my second attempt at using Armageddon brand. Overall, it was actually quite a fun build, maybe not the most effective Beefton I've done, because that would probably still have to be Blade Vortex, and if you 1-for-1 substituted my build in for Blade Vortex, pretty sure it'd just be a much stronger build. But this one tried to make use of a few funky things like Armageddon brand with Flame Surge combo, the new Explosion chest, and then Disintegrator, and overall it was a pretty decent build, but if you're going to try and copy it directly, then you might struggle to get the exact Explosion mod chest early on into the league, as well as the Disintegrator, but off of pretty minimal gear you should be able to do fairly similar things, and ultimately if it needs to, just grab a Blade Vortex and do that instead, because it will take you all the way through and probably end up being a stronger character. But overall the effectiveness I'm pretty sure was rather high, the budget not too bad, and the enjoyment also fairly high for being a nice thick Beefton. So if we grab our character's gear real quick, we are looking at, that's Beefton 3.0, not fully updated though I don't think, but you can see the gear actually should be fully updated, and there wasn't too much special stuff going on, just the Disintegrator, a Circle of Anguish, which I think was on the cheaper end at the time, but might not be early on to a league. Could be a bit hard to get, but the gear should be actually pretty basic to get just for early on stuff, because nothing specific is required except for a Disintegrator, but you can use other stuff. You don't have to use a Disintegrator. It was just a choice I made to try and get max effectiveness out of the build at some point. And for a rating then, I guess we'd give it an effectiveness. Looked like a pretty solid 9 to me. And enjoyment, I'd call it a 7. Still kind of just a, I don't know, pretty regular skill combo I'd say. Budget, can it be starter? Probably also a 7. And that makes it a total of, hold on, I can do this, 23. Next up was my first real solid attempt at Flicker Strike in quite a while, and that was Flicker Strike, Heavy Strike, so a single target AoE, Void Forge Inquisitor. Haven't really done too many attack-based Inquisitors, even though they are very strong, and Void Forge, once again, just extremely cheap at the time, so I had to prove its worth one more time. And overall, this was a extremely solid character. The novelty of freezing everything and destroying it in several hits was quite high. I'm not a huge fan of Flicker Strike in general though, because just it's a loss of control of your character a lot of the time, and I really like being in control of my character and the precise movements, but I can't lie, it's pretty damn satisfying to crush screens and destroy things with the heavy strike single target as well. It's also very fast as a melee skill. You can make it as fast as you want with the various clear, and it can be different ascendancies as well, but I think Inquisitor just makes quite a lot of sense for this one, for the Void Forge playstyle, since it's got a lot of area and then a lot of that extra LE damage. Overall, I think it was probably one of my better characters this league, but feels a bit cheesy just using Void Forge to win at any sort of skill, at least in my opinion. Anytime I want a build to succeed, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to put a Void Forge into it. I know it's going to be good. So there's not really much to figure out. It's just kind of how I build the skill, the passive tree, the new ascendancy, but I know it's going to be good because Void Forge is just that good. So then if we have a look at the character's gear, we got ourselves a revolving door, and that is quite a lot of stuff, right? There's an Abyssus, there's a Void Forge. It's a bit tough to say how easy this character would be to start because Void Forge is a really cheap item after like a week or so, but it's going to be pretty damn hard to get your hands onto it for the first few weeks. So probably not anywhere close to starter viable, and you'd really want to invest some solid gear into this one to make it something worth playing, especially as an attack-based Inquisitor. They do kind of have a rough start, I feel, just because of lots of passive tree travel, and until they've got all their ascendancies, it's kind of tough to actually enjoy the character to its fullest. So it is a really strong character, but I wouldn't recommend starting it until your second or third one for a league just about ever. So if we have a look at it here, it's going to be this one here. Effectiveness, I mean, that's pretty much a 10. Enjoyment, I'd give it a 9. And then budget, total, yeah, you're not really starting it. Or should you? I don't think. So maybe give that a 4. So overall, strong stuff, but a total of maybe 23. Because if you throw a bunch of currency at a thing, typically it's going to just work out, right? I'll then whip out a character that you probably won't really be able to tell what's happening because the bitrate is extremely crushed while filming this stuff, and then seeing it filmed through the YouTube video, once again, pretty damn crushed. And it's Poet Pen Scion, so kind of want to force a Scion for a change because it's pretty unloved ascendancy. And it's Poet's Pen, which means you're attacking with a wand. You've got skills socketed inside that wand, and every time you attack, you will cast those skills. Pretty damn fun character in the end, but it is extremely unstarter viable because you need Poet's Pens, you need some decent gear, and you need a beastly McFucking PC. So that's just ruling a lot of people out of playing this thing, but it was quite a lot of enjoyment to roll through the game in something like this. I'd say if you're looking for a similar character and want to sort of be a bit easier in your PC, maybe also a bit more effective, just have a look at the Pathfinder cast on crit Blade Vortex and Bladeful character I played a couple leagues ago. That thing was insane and it had more effectiveness, I'd say, but as well as that, it was a lot easier on your PC, probably a bit easier to create as well. Overall though, pretty funky character. I don't play around with Poet's Pen too much, and when I do, it's usually quite an adventure. Right from level 12, I think, is when you can start using them. So if you're looking at the gear side of things, it's my only Scion for the league, I do believe, and just a couple of Poet's Pens. You got a Devouring Diadem, and then the gear's nothing too strict, or at least expensiveness-wise, but there are some pretty interesting items you definitely would benefit from having. Assassin Mark Ring, dual conversion gloves that you got to craft yourself, extra damage as an element, amulet. You do want a Watcher's Eye, you do want a Taste of Hate, some pretty specific sort of crit multi attack speed jewels. So it's not super expensive, I don't think, but it wouldn't be super easy just to go out and buy all this shit. So if we're going to have a look at our rating, say in effectiveness, we give it an 8. Could be better single target. Pretty decent clear though, I think. Enjoyment, definitely give that an 8 as well. Pretty enjoyable to play, but just the lack of frames makes it kind of a bit lower than it honestly should be. And then budget, can it be a starter? Nah, not really. So that's maybe a 21. Because most things can be a star, so it's hard to ever give something a 0 out of 10. But some things just really benefit from gear and a bit of know-how as to actually how to play the game. We then roll up to what was probably build of the league without even having to like rate anything, because it was the strongest thing I've ever played, I think. And it wasn't necessarily just Savior. It was kind of a combination of all these things put together. Savior itself is kind of a build enhancement, so I wouldn't be afraid of doing this build if you don't think you can get a Savior anytime soon, because you don't really need it to make something like this work very well at all. It's just an enhancement to the single target most of the time, I'd say, and then a bit of extra fun factor because you got a few extra clones of yourself. But it's double strike Berserker, it's with Impale, which was my first ever real serious Impale stack, and essentially I just went balls to the wall with sort of the mechanics of damage. So Berserker, Abyssus, flat physical swords, Impale stacking, Savior, good strong weapon, and overall it couldn't compete. No other build could compete with this one for effectiveness, I don't think, overall for the game. I had easily the most single target I've ever had. I've had probably the fastest attack speed I've ever had, and it also resulted in some pretty meaty clear, and then ultimately it was actually pretty good single target, defensiveness for what it was as well. If we have a look at some of our single target options, it was like the dumbest single target I've ever seen. Most bosses straight up ceased to exist. A lot of these bosses had monster life mods, and once you pop your Vile Double Strike and your other buffs, I've never seen anything like this. This is buffed boss HP as well, and it's impossible to compare any other of my builds to this single target damage, because as soon as I wanted something to die, it absolutely would die. And I never even faced a Metamorph throughout this character, because every time I'd pop Metamorph, I'd click the max stuff, no matter what the map mod, pop all my things, insta-kill Metamorph, they never fought back. So if we look at the gear of the character, we did make some respectable stuff, like just attack speed foil. We've got a sort of Savior, an Abyssus, and then a hybridized chest with some explosion mod. Gloves aren't anything too special, kind of just temple stuff, some Tailwind boots. You do want a bit of flat physical, a bit of multi on an amulet, and then it's just about kind of min-maxing your accuracy, your damage, and your life. And ultimately, yeah, you could go a lot less damage and still be fine. You could do it off of level 1 right up to level 90. Just sort of budget starter gear, because double strike scales itself all the way through, so it's actually a pretty damn good starter as well. Even though the gear might not indicate that to begin with, it should scale its way all the way through leveling and then gearing by itself, because just double strike has a lot of scaling, and then the Vile skills of Vile Double Strike and Warchief Totem are just that strong. So if Impale doesn't really get nerfed and none of these interactions get nerfed, it's probably still going to be one of the best things you can pick. So for effectiveness, we'd have to give him a 10. Enjoyment, it was a lot of fun just destroying things and actually having a really fast attack speed, good clear speed, and I played it up to level 95. I think that was my highest character of the league, so a 10. And a budget, can it be a starter? The gear might not suggest so to begin with, but it definitely can be, I think. But you do benefit from getting all that other fun, nice gear. Give that a 9. So yeah, build of the league by rating and by choice, I'd say, Double Strike Zerker. We then have one of the dumbest looking, sounding, and in concept builds I've probably ever done, and that is Barrage Totem's Impale Stacking Champion Wanda. So you do have just physical damage wands, or a wand. You do have Barrage with the new microtransaction sometimes, but typically not, because without the microtransaction, it is dubbed Arcane Spaghetti, because the new Barrage wanding look that it has just got revamped in microtransaction. So, well, not microtransaction, just actual graphic. So it was revamped to look something like this, and it sounds really funky. It's got this like popcorn sort of noise to it. It's extremely laggy on your PC, and it was moderately effective. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be in the end, but it didn't reach the heights that it probably should have for the amount of stuff you have to put into it, I think. Ultimately, it wasn't a bad build, and it was kind of fun to play. Most of the fun for me was putting it together, and I'm not sure I really recommend anyone else play it. though I can't remember what the videos exactly said, because it was okay for single target, it was okay for clear. Ultimately, it was mostly just a novelty of a character, and if you want to copy something like that, then shit, novelties are entirely up to you, right? But it was just a bit of a weird one, and not the most effective one on your PC, as you could tell. Just every Metamorph looked something like that. So it's a little rough to really recommend or talk more about, right? Effectiveness, I'm going to call it a 7. Enjoyment, I'm going to call it a 6. And budget, can it be a starter? You need a 10k Omega LOL PC, so we'd give that a 4. Yeah, not the highest of ratings for this one, right? But that puts it at a 17, I believe, and that's a little unfortunate. If we then look at Ignite Arc Hierophant, that's this one, right? We'll actually have a look at the longest boss kill ever as well. So this was basically my first attempt at Mana Storm, and that is a item that sacrifices all of your mana to give you flat lightning damage, and then I wanted to make it an Ignite Arc or Ignite Shock Nova build, but Arc ended up doing much better. The boss damage, absolutely non-existent. I've never had such little boss damage in my life, as you can see through some of these clips. Maybe I've got some clips of actually killing stuff as well, but the actual clear was some of the best clear we would have had, because Varlark is an absolute beast, and it would clear screens, it would clear beyond, like double beyonds non-stop, it would clear legions in one button, and the AoE just without Varlark was also pretty damn good, so you weren't 100% reliant on that, but it seems like a very momentum-based character. The more you killed, the better the character would be, and if you didn't have to kill too many tough single target mobs, it was pretty damn strong. Overall, no, don't play it. I wouldn't recommend it. And budget starter and stuff, not really. Enjoyment, kind of. But mostly because I'm a masochist, and it was just fun actually doing the longest Uber Elder of my life, where I had to do mechanics non-stop for like 10 minutes. So yeah, that's that one. Bit of a rating system coming in for this one. Oh my god, what do we do? Effectiveness. It's hard to say, right? Because it cleared really well, but it didn't kill anything ever. I have to give it a 4 for that. Enjoyment, like I said, me personally, kind of hate myself and want to put myself through that all for slow, fun, single target boss kills. Still got to give it a 6. Budget, can it be a starter? I don't know, probably not. Yeah, let's rate this one a 13. I think that makes sense. And then the last couple of builds, I do have another attempt at a savior character, which was, I was trying to hybridize skills here with Static Strike and Consecrated Path, and in the end I just picked Consecrated Path for the most part, but for a lot of the character's life I was trying out both skills and trying to use both skills at once. And it was my just elemental sort of skill attempt at a savior build, which was pretty effective, pretty damn fun, a little bit of a budget to it, and overall not a bad use of saviors, not a bad use of elementalist. Haven't done Consecrated Path in a while, and this was just another attempt at it. It's kind of a more controlled Flicker Strike, which I think can potentially be more enjoyable than Flicker Strike, but it really depends on the character as a whole, and I think maybe we didn't get quite enough area compared to like a Void Forge version, and I don't know what else to say. I think maybe defensiveness was a bit lacking in the end from what I remember as well. It was pretty damn good for almost everything I did though. It was fast clear, it was decent bossing, it was quite a lot of fun to put together, and it could do a lot of delve as well. But I think it probably should have pulled out a bit more defensiveness should it be a truly top tier character, but once again, Savior is just a lot of fun to build around, and you don't really need a Savior. I do still hold firm that Savior is more of a build enhancement rather than something as a pure build defining item. So you could do very similar with a Void Forge, Onigoroshi, something like that. Still would be a very good character. If we then rate this guy as an effectiveness, I'd give him pretty much an 8 because like I said, tankiness could have used some work in the end game. Though it didn't struggle, I definitely would have liked it to be a bit thicker. Enjoyment, that was a solid 9, I'd say. Starter, pretty much no. I'd give that a 4. So that makes it a total of, I can't count, 21. Maybe. Yeah. And then lastly, the character I've been playing for like 6 days now because I've been grinding my face against an extremely hard all in an extremely hard manner, but that's something for another time. It's Burning Arrow Trickster, and it is a Stormfire variant. Now, when I first introduced Burning Arrow as an option, it was as just regular Burning Arrow, no Stormfire. It was a starter version for this league, and I think it still definitely can be a starter. This one itself, probably not as much of a starter because you really have to get to like level 80 for the character to be at its max effectiveness, and you're going to be better off just burning arrowing until then the normal way, which would still be very starter viable, I think. It was a pretty fun character. It was fairly effective overall, built as sort of a hybrid thing, but there's definitely more effective characters out there. Possibly just a very similar variant, but as Explosive Arrow would be better, though I haven't actually looked into Ignite Explosive Arrow myself. I just know it's supposed to be pretty decent. Endgame bossing on this thing was a fucking joke because the playstyle is just super cruisy. So while I was doing my really hard all, I'd occasionally do some endgame. That all would, you know, pounding me relentlessly, but then I'd just go do some endgame of the other sort to get some soul fight and kill some bosses, Cirrus, the Conquerors, all that, and it was just a joke, right? Basically, never had my life in threat, good effective health, good damage, and not too expensive to put together. So overall, we'd have to be calling this one pretty solid in the effectiveness, like a 9, and enjoyment, pretty solid as well. Can it be a starter? I think it can be if you're doing the other variant, but this particular variant, not quite, because you do need a Stormfire and some good lightning gear and all of that. So in total, that's not a bad rating because Burning Arrow, pretty damn strong, could be an Explosive Arrow variant, and it's overall fairly solid build. I'd still highly kind of recommend it if you're looking for an Ignite sort of thing to do. So whatever the total that is, 24 I think. And I think that actually kind of wraps it up. I am still doing one more build for the league, and that will be currently a Glacial Hammer Jug with strength stacking, Pillar of the Cage God. No idea if it'll be good in the end. Probably not that good because I think I could make a better one without going into full memes, but maybe it'll be satisfying. We'll have a wait and see. That basically sums up the characters for the league. I do think just build for Savior, Double Strike Zerka, easily the most effective, most fun, and dumbest character I've pretty much ever done for damage. I do think that, as I mentioned, Gladiator Bow Puncture, probably the best starter I would have ever picked, and a lot of fun to do as well, so I could still recommend that. If I had to pick a personal favorite out of just all of this for some strange reason that wasn't those two, it was actually kind of a weird league for me, I feel. I was trying to do a lot of niche, weird ideas, and not necessarily just effective, strong characters to stand out from the crowd. Maybe the Infernal Blow Facebreaker Zerka was my kind of just most enjoyable sort of favorite build for the league because the MTX set on that character looked really freaking sweet. He just had this assassin look to him, and just uppercutting things and actually having them explode very quickly and very satisfyingly is hard to compete with. But that's if I'm not picking Gladiator, Bow, or the usual Double Strike Zerka. I had to pick the Infernal Blow, just Zerka as well. So for all that's said and done, spells and ranged and all that, still kind of just melee attacks. They're still pretty damn good. And in the next league, we'll have to wait and see. It might just be Spell League, might be one league. But that's it for my ratings. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. It's a bit long, and it basically summarizes Metamorph for me and all the builds I did. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.